Your objective is to secure Active Directory. Once you've had access to the main controller, you basically have access to everything forever after. The Red Forest, a technique to uplift the hacking resilience of your Active Directory. 3 other techniques to further uplift this and really get you to best practice level. Hi, this is Carsten from Hacking Matters, where each week we discover the best practices in cybersecurity. This week we talk about Red Forest, a way to secure your Active Directory. Red Forest is a design principle that tries to keep hackers as far away from your domain controllers in Active Directory as possible. Why do we need to secure Active Directory? Because everyone wants to hack Active Directory. Your state-sponsored criminal wants to hack it, to have persistent access for many, many years, basically APT, Advanced Persistent Threats, but also your much shorter-lived ransomware gangs want to control it, at least temporarily, so they can encrypt all your files and delete your backups. So Active Directory control is really the goal in many hacking playbooks, and so your objective is to secure Active Directory. Microsoft declared the Red Forest design principle outdated a while ago. I think that was premature. Microsoft is arguing you should move everything into the Microsoft cloud. Of course they would. And then everything is nicely secured there. I have some questions around that. But basically they're saying you don't need to build your own Red Forest anymore on-premise because there won't be much to secure on-premise anymore. We won't reach that state for several more years in most organizations. Even if you have migrated a lot of business workloads into the cloud, there still are many components left on-premise and some operational technology and other assets that are just very difficult to migrate to the cloud. While Microsoft has already moved on, basically urging everyone to buy more of their cloud services, it still is an imperative that we secure Active Directories where we have them. And Red Forest is doing that. The Red Forest principle makes lateral movement in Active Directory harder. You might recall from an earlier video how we split the hacking journeys into 3 steps: the initial intrusion, the lateral movement, and the caching out. So it's a middle step, the lateral movement within an environment, that we want to make more difficult. Lateral movement in a nutshell means you have access to some asset that's not your target asset, and you escalate your access up and up and up, usually by collecting access credentials on the computers you already hacked that give you then access to more computers. You escalate your access up until you reach the Active Directory domain controller. Once you've had access to the main controller, even for a short period of time, you basically have access to everything forever after. So how then does the Red Forest make it difficult for the hacker to gain that access? Simply by breaking your organization into 2, basically, and saying, here are all the normal computers, and they're all somehow connected to one another, and here are all the computers and users that are allowed to access our domain controllers, and they're completely separate. So a hacker cannot laterally move from one group to the other. And you achieve this separation by way of having different Active Directories, or perhaps in large organization, entire forests. So an Active Directory can be a collection of multiple ones, and that's then referred to as a forest, hence the name Red Forest. That's your most privileged forest. But simplistically speaking, you start with one Active Directory, you put a second one next to it, and the first one trusts the second one, but not the other way around. So you basically can hand down commands from the newly created one to the other one. So that's your first step. You then create users in that second Active Directory whose sole purpose is management of the domain controllers in the first Active Directory. And then as the last step, you remove all the users in the first Active Directory that could possibly access the domain controllers. So there's no lateral movement path left within that first Active Directory to break into the domain controller. From the perspective of an administrator then, they have 2 different accounts. One in the original Active Directory for emailing, accessing the internet, and normal everyday workloads. The second account in a different Active Directory to access the domain controllers. Now it's important that you only do that from computers that are not part of the first Active Directory. Otherwise, again, you create a link. So in a really clean Red Forest design, you'd have 2 separate computers. A more practical way to do this is by way of virtual machines, basically having a workstation that you self-manage, that's not part of the Active Directory, from which you can access the domain controllers, but then do all your actual workloads inside a virtual machine that can be part of the original Active Directory. You can also use a PAM solution as an additional security boundary between your Active Directories. That probably takes away a little bit from the red forest cleanliness of design, but in most organizations has been proven to be strong enough as long as the admins themselves don't get hacked on their private workstations. To recap, the 3 steps to set up the red forest: create a separate Active Directory with a few users that are your highest privileged ones. Second, create trust towards the original Active Directory, saying those users are our domain admins. Third, take away any access to domain controllers from that original domain to have that clear separation. That second Active Directory, the one you're newly creating, that could be in the cloud. Now that everyone is moving towards the cloud, that's a valid option. Now, be cautious here and remember that the cloud does not give you any backup options. You are really in the hands of the cloud provider. And if you're making mistakes or if they're making mistakes and somehow your configuration is destroyed, there might not be an easy way to recover it. So this being your central nervous system, careful in your design how much you trust the cloud. But aside from that small wrinkle, moving into the cloud probably is a good idea for almost everyone, because the cloud providers, of course, at scale can implement a lot more security best practices than we can do individually. So that's your red forest, a technique to uplift the hacking resilience of your Active Directory. Allow me to mention 3 other techniques to further uplift this and really get you to best practice level. The first is LAPS, L-A-P-S. It's basically in response to the problem that in many organizations, every single computer's local admin user has the same password. That's so if you bring your laptop to the local help desk because it's malfunctioning in some way, they can log into it and fix whatever is broken with it. For them, it's very easy to have the same password everywhere. But that also means that a hacker who's on one of these computers has an access credential to all the other ones. Not desirable. So LAPS is a tool from Microsoft that allows you to set an individual local admin password for each of these systems in a way that your help desk can still generate them and access computers as needed. So you really want that in addition to the red forest. Secondly, you want to switch off NTLM. This is an authentication schema that's still supported by Windows today, but goes all the way back to Windows NT, so even before Active Directory was introduced 25 years ago. And it's kept in there for compatibility's sake, but most organizations don't run anything that relies on it anymore. Perhaps some printers, other than these corner cases that possibly can carve out from your directory entirely, you want to switch off NTLM. Microsoft is planning to retire it anyway. You want to be ahead of the curve because hackers are now going to burn whatever knowledge they have about NTLM before it's retiring. Lastly, you want to reset your Kerberos. Kerberos is the authentication kernel inside Active Directory. It basically issues those tickets, including the golden tickets we talked about earlier. If there's any chance that anyone has ever hacked your Active Directory, maybe before you adopted the red forest, then their access credentials are still valid, possibly forever. By resetting Kerberos, you invalidate the previous credentials and make sure that everyone gets fresh tickets. This is a completely automated process, so you might experience a few seconds slowdown at the point where you do reset the Kerberos, but other than that, this should have no effect. There's no automatic reset, so it doesn't happen periodically unless you force it to. And it's best practice in organizations that do worry about APTs to reset Kerberos at least once a year. Some organizations do it every month. In order to reset Kerberos, you basically need to increment a counter that says what epoch your authentication scheme is in right now. And you can increment this as often as you want, and access credentials are always valid for the epoch they're created in and the one afterwards. For proper Kerberos reset, you need to increment this number twice, so that whatever golden tickets might be floating around in criminal hands, they become invalid in this one move. And you don't allow somebody to use the existing golden ticket to create a new one for the new epoch. So the steps to do a Kerberos reset are basically You disallow connections to the Active Directory very briefly. You run these commands to increment the counter twice. Then you allow connectivity again. At this point, everyone who needs to authenticate to somebody else, usually machine to machine, will see, oh, my credentials are not valid anymore. I need to go to Active Directory and get a new ticket, and that then remains valid for a predetermined period of time, or in the case of golden tickets, it remains valid until you do go through the Kerberos reset again twice. Do this at least once a year, and definitely do it before and after switching over to the Red Forest. Otherwise, you might still have an APT intrusion even after adopting the Red Forest. I hope this was helpful in bringing together best practices that Microsoft says are no longer needed because everyone should move to the cloud. But if you, like many organizations out there, have at least some on-premise presence still, do introduce the Red Forest. Definitely have labs for your endpoints for the local passwords. Do switch off NTLM hashes and do the Kerberos reset at least once, preferably regularly. That really brings you to best practice level where ransomware crew most likely says this is deviating from our standard playbook in so many ways, we might just as well go somewhere else and find an easy hacking target. They have it. Active Directory best practices 25 years after Active Directory was introduced. I hope this was helpful. Please show it with a like and subscribe when it was. Let us know in the comments what else you'd like us to discuss. And until next week, happy hacking.